The angel number. You start seeing when you're ready to stop explaining yourself. You were mid-sentence when you saw it. Explaining a decision again. Softening it. Adding context nobody asked for. And there it was on the screen in front of you. A row of zeros, staring back while your voice trailed off. You told yourself it meant nothing. You are not naive. You know how coincidence works, how the mind hunts for patterns when it is tired. But it kept happening. Always in the same moment. Always while you were justifying your existence to someone who had already made up their mind. Here is the first layer of the answer. A repeating sequence of zeros appears when a cycle in your life has already closed and you have not admitted it out loud. It marks completion, not beginning. It shows up when the version of you that needed permission has quietly stopped existing, and you are still speaking in its voice out of habit. That is the surface meaning. But what those zeros are doing in your life runs through 3 layers, and the third is the one almost nobody explains. Because the number is not asking you to speak better. It is asking you to stop. The exhaustion nobody names. There is a specific kind of tiredness that sleep does not touch. You know it. You leave a conversation and feel emptied out. Not from conflict, but from effort. The effort of translation. You spent the whole time converting yourself into a language the other person could accept. You do it automatically now. You say no, and then explain the no. You choose something and then build a case for the choice. You feel a boundary rising, and you immediately soften it with reasons, examples, apologies dressed as clarity. Nobody sees this labor. That is why it exhausts you. From the outside, you look articulate, reasonable, easy to deal with. Inside, you are running a constant courtroom where you are always the defendant and the verdict never arrives. And this is where most people misread what is happening to them. They think the exhaustion comes from the people around them. Difficult family. A partner who does not listen. A workplace that drains. So they change the people, the city, the job, and within a few months the same tiredness returns wearing a different face. The exhaustion is not coming from them. It comes from the internal position you keep taking. The position of someone who believes they must earn the right to their own choices. You learned that position early. It probably kept you safe once. Explaining yourself made you legible, and being legible made you tolerated. It worked. That is exactly why it is so hard to drop. But something has shifted recently. You have noticed it. The explanations no longer land. You give your reasons and they change nothing. The same people misunderstand you in the same way, with more information than before. You are building better arguments for an audience that was never listening. That is the moment the zeros start appearing. They do not arrive when you are strong. They arrive when the strategy collapses. When you have run the experiment enough times to feel, somewhere under the tiredness, that no amount of explaining will produce the acceptance you were trying to buy. Completion always feels like exhaustion before it feels like freedom. And there is a reason the sign that meets you here is made of zeros and nothing else. That shape is not accidental. And once you understand what a zero actually represents, the pattern stops looking like emptiness. What 000 actually means, the number is 000, 4 zeros. That is the sequence following you. And most interpretations get it wrong immediately, because they read 0 as absence. 0 is not absence. In sacred numerology, 0 is the field before form. It is potential that has not yet chosen a shape. Every other number is a defined thing, a direction, a stage. 0 is the space all of them emerge from. So when 0 repeats 4 times, it is not telling you that you have nothing. It is telling you that you are standing in unformed space. That is disorienting for a reason. Unformed space has no script, no role to perform, nobody to convince. Notice what explaining yourself actually requires. It requires a form, a story about who you are, why you're like this, what happened to make you this way. You hand people the form so they can hold it and approve it. 000 dissolves the form. That is why the sequence appears in this exact phase of life. You are between identities. The old story about yourself has stopped being accurate. and the new one has not solidified. You keep reaching for the old explanation because it is the only one you have, and every time you use it, your body registers that it is a lie. There is a detail in this pattern that changes everything, and it is easy to miss. 0 has no value on its own, but it multiplies the value of whatever stands beside it. Placed after a 1, it makes 10. Placed after that, 100. 0 does not compete with the number. It amplifies it. 4 zeros with no digit in front of them means the amplification is waiting. The field is prepared and nothing has been placed in it yet. Which raises the real question of this whole pattern. What are you going to put there? Because whatever you place beside that space gets multiplied. If you place another decade of justification there, it will amplify that. If you place a single unexplained decision there, it amplifies that instead. The zeros are not a message about who you are. They are a message about what has ended, and about the strange, quiet room you are now standing in. And to understand why leaving that room is so difficult, you have to look at how the habit of explaining was built in the first place. It did not start with the people who exhaust you now. The habit you built to survive. No child explains themselves for pleasure. They do it because silence was punished, because a mood in the house shifted, and they learned to talk their way back into safety, because being misunderstood once cost them something they could not afford to lose again. So the habit formed. Speak first. Justify early. Anticipate the accusation and dismantle it before it arrives. If that sounds familiar, understand what it actually was. It was intelligence. A precise reading of an environment where approval was conditional and withdrawal was dangerous. The problem is that survival strategies do not expire on their own. They keep running long after the environment changes. You are an adult now. Nobody can withdraw the ground beneath you for making a decision they dislike. But the nervous system does not update from logic. It updates from experience. And you have never given it the experience of choosing something, staying silent about it, and surviving. Here is where most people go wrong when they try to fix this. They decide to become firmer, colder. They rehearse the boundary, deliver it, and then collapse into over-explaining the moment they feel the other person's disappointment. Firmness is not the missing piece. Tolerance is. Specifically, tolerance for the discomfort of being seen incorrectly and doing nothing about it. That is the skill you never developed because in your original environment it was not survivable. Being misread meant being unsafe. So you built a life around correction, clarification, preemptive defense. And it worked well enough that you never noticed the cost. The cost is that your choices stopped being yours. A choice you must defend is a choice you are still negotiating. This is what completion means in the language of 0000. Not that the people change, not that they finally understand. It means the strategy has reached the end of its usefulness, and the sequence is marking that ending the way a clock marks an hour. The old contract is finished. The habit is still walking around. What comes next asks something harder of you than firmness. It asks you to look directly at the 0 itself, and to stop reading it as loss. 0 is not empty. Every language treats 0 as nothing. Nothing left, nothing gained, nothing to show. That reading is recent. 0 arrived late in mathematics, and when it arrived, it broke everything. It was resisted for centuries because thinkers could not accept a symbol for what is not there. But 0 was never a symbol for absence. It was a symbol for the place where something can exist. Hold that against what your life feels like right now. You probably describe this phase in terms of loss. Friendships thinned out. A version of your career stopped making sense. Conversations that used to feel warm now feel like performance. You look around and count what is missing. Try counting what is unoccupied instead. The friendship that thinned did not leave a hole. It left available hours. The role you stopped performing did not take your identity. It returned your attention. The explanation you stopped giving did not cost you clarity. It gave you back the 20 minutes you would have spent building it. And this is exactly where most people misread the sign. They see 000 during a season of subtraction and conclude the message is grief. So they wait for the loss to reverse. They wait for the people to come back, for the old shape to reassemble. It will not reassemble. That is not failure. That is the point of a completed cycle. Notice something about how zeros behave in a sequence. They hold position. In a number, a zero is not decorative, it is structural. Remove it, and the entire value collapses. Zero keeps the space open so the other digits stay where they belong. You are being asked to hold position, not to fill the space quickly, not to replace what left with something similar, not to explain the emptiness to anyone who asks why you have gone quiet. Just hold it. The instinct will be to fill it fast because open space feels like exposure. When there is nothing to defend, you have nothing to hide behind either. A person mid-explanation is busy. A person standing still is visible. Visibility without justification is the state 000 keeps pointing at. And there is a reason the sequence uses 4 of them rather than 2 or 3. Each zero corresponds to a different place the explaining lives, and the fourth one is the layer almost nobody reaches. 4 zeros, 4 silences. 4 is the number of structure. 4 walls, 4 directions, 4 seasons. When a spiritual signal repeats 4 times, it is describing something that must happen on every side of your life, not just one. So the 4 zeros mark 4 separate silences. The first silence is external. It is the one you already know about. You stop narrating your decisions to other people. You answer with the decision and nothing after it. No reasons appended. No context volunteered. That one is uncomfortable but simple. It is mechanical. You just close your mouth earlier than usual. The second silence is anticipatory. This one is harder. It is the silence of not rehearsing. You do it in the shower, in the car, at 2 in the morning. You build the case in advance. You imagine the objection, and you construct the paragraph that will dissolve it. By the time the conversation arrives, you have already had it 11 times. That rehearsal is explaining yourself to a person who is not in the room. Stopping it feels like walking into a conversation unarmed. The third silence is internal. This is where it gets uncomfortable in a different way. You explain yourself to yourself. Constantly, you make a choice and then run an internal justification loop, checking it against imagined judgment, testing whether it would hold up if questioned. You are your own most demanding interrogator. Most people never get past the third silence. And this is where the pattern turns because the fourth is the one that actually changes your life. The fourth silence is retroactive. It is the silence you offer your past. Every old decision you still explain. The relationship you left and still describe with careful framing. The path you did not take and still account for. The years you defend as not wasted. You are still explaining a person who no longer exists to people who are no longer asking. 4 zeros means the ending has to be complete. Outward, forward, inward, backward. Not one of those alone. And the moment you begin closing all 4, you will run directly into the question that has been sitting underneath this pattern from the beginning. Why did the explaining never work, even when your reasons were good? Why the explaining never worked. Your reasons were good. That is what makes this so disorienting. You were articulate, honest. You gave context, you acknowledged their view, you were fair. And it changed nothing. The reason it changed nothing is that you were answering a question nobody asked. When someone reacts badly to your decision, they are rarely confused about the decision. They understood it. What they are expressing is that your decision costs them something. Comfort, access, an image of you they relied on. You keep responding with information. They are not experiencing an information problem. They are experiencing a loss. No explanation resolves a loss. It only extends the conversation. That is why the arguments got longer, cleaner, more thorough, and the outcome stayed identical. You were bringing evidence to a grief. And this is where most people get the meaning wrong. They conclude the other person is manipulative or unreasonable. Sometimes that is true. Usually it is simpler and sadder. The other person is adjusting, and adjustment takes time, and no amount of your talking accelerates it. Your explanations were not clarifying anything. They were signaling that the decision was still open for review. Think about what a justification communicates. It says, I believe you have standing here. It says, if my reasons are insufficient, We can revisit this. Every explanation quietly reopens the negotiation you were trying to end. That is why the people around you kept pushing. Not because they missed your point, but because you kept indicating the point was still up for discussion. A decision that is explained is a proposal. A decision that is stated is a fact. Facts are absorbed. Proposals are debated. 000 appears at the moment you have gathered enough evidence to see this, not intellectually, experientially. You have tried the explaining approach for years and you have the results. The cycle has closed because you finally have the data, and now something uncomfortable is going to become visible. Once you stop explaining, you will find out which relationships were built on the explanation itself. The people who loved the explained version. There is a version of you that was easy to love. It arrived pre-justified. It anticipated concerns. It handled other people's discomfort before they had to feel it. It made itself understandable at its own expense. Some people in your life did not fall in love with you. They fell in love with the labor. That sentence is hard to sit with, so sit with it slowly. They liked that you never made them work to understand you. They liked that your boundaries came wrapped in apology, which made them soft enough to push through. They liked that you did the emotional accounting for both of you. When you stop, they will experience it as coldness. You should expect that language. Distant. Changed. Harder to reach. Not the same person you used to be. They are describing something real. You have changed. What they are misnaming is the direction of the change. And here is the detail almost nobody prepares for. The people who react worst are not always the cruel ones. Often they are the ones who genuinely care about you, and who simply built their sense of the relationship on your constant availability for explanation. Their reaction is not proof that you were wrong. It is proof that the old arrangement was load-bearing for them. Some of these relationships will survive. Those are the ones where the other person, after the initial friction, adjusts. They stop asking why. They begin taking your statements at face value. It is awkward for a while, and then it is easier for everyone. Others will not survive. Not through conflict, through quiet. The conversations will get shorter. Contact will thin. There will be no rupture to point at, no incident, nothing you could explain even if you wanted to. Just a slow decline in frequency until the relationship becomes a memory with a warm feeling attached. That is the subtraction phase the zeros keep marking. And it produces a very particular sensation, one that people almost always misinterpret as depression. It is not depression. It is the void that arrives after a structure comes down and before a new one goes up. The void that comes before the rebuild. There is a stretch of time in this process where nothing feels like anything. You are not sad exactly, not anxious, not relieved either. You are flat. Conversations feel thin. Things that used to move you slide past. You wonder if something has broken in you. Nothing has broken. You have simply removed the engine that was generating most of your emotional activity. Consider how much feeling the explaining produced. Anticipation before the conversation. Adrenaline during it. Analysis afterward. Replaying, revising, wondering how it landed. That cycle ran constantly and it felt like living. It was not living. It was weather. When you stop, the weather stops. And the first thing you notice about calm is how much it resembles emptiness. This is where most people abandon the process. The flatness frightens them, so they reach for stimulation. They pick up an old conversation. They send the message that reopens the debate. They explain one more time, and the weather returns, and the familiar exhaustion returns with it. And it feels almost like relief because at least it is recognizable. Do not do that. Stay in the flat part. The void is not a symptom. It is the field the 4 zeros describe. Unformed space, holding position, waiting for what you place in it. Something specific happens if you stay long enough. Preferences begin surfacing that have nothing to do with anyone else. They arrive small. You want to eat at an odd hour. You want to leave a gathering early with no story attached. You want to spend a Saturday on something with no productive justification. These are not decisions yet. They are signals returning from a channel that was jammed for years. You could not hear them before because every impulse was immediately routed through a filter. Is this defensible? Could I explain this if asked? Anything that failed the filter never reached your awareness. The void is quiet enough that they get through. And once they start arriving, you will notice something about the timing of the zeros. They tend to appear at very particular moments on the clock, and that timing is not decorative. When the zeros appear on the clock, 10 o'clock exactly, the top of an hour, a trip odometer reading in round numbers, a total on a receipt that lands clean. Notice what all of those have in common. They are moments of completion. The zeros gather at the point where a count finishes. That is the mechanism. The sign appears at endings. There is a psychological explanation and a symbolic one, and both are true at the same time. Psychologically, your attention is primed. A mind under transition scans for confirmation, and it notices what matches its current question. That is real. It is also not a dismissal. The question is why this particular pattern, and why now, and why always in these moments. Because pattern recognition does not invent content. It selects it. Your attention locks onto zero specifically because something in you already knows this is a season of endings, and the shape of an ending is a zero. Symbolically, the timing is doing something more precise, and this is the part almost nobody notices. Look at when the zeros catch you. Not during your calm hours. They catch you mid-apology, mid-justification. In the seconds after you send the message, you did not need to send. Right when you are performing the old habit. That is not accidental timing. That is the sign functioning as an interruption. A synchronicity that arrives during your worst moment is not a reward. It is a marker placed on the exact behavior that has to end. Start treating it that way. When the zeros appear, stop and ask what you were doing in the previous 30 seconds. Almost always you will find yourself in the middle of explaining something to someone who did not require it. The sign is not telling you that you are on the right path. It is showing you where the old path is still running, and once you begin catching yourself there, you will encounter the first serious objection to all of this. The fear that if you stop explaining, you become cold, closed off, someone who has given up on being known. Silence is not withdrawal. The fear is legitimate, so let us take it seriously. You have known people who stopped explaining themselves and became unreachable, rigid, contemptuous. They confused refusing to justify with refusing to relate. That is not what this is, and the difference matters enormously. Withdrawal says, I owe you nothing, and I want nothing from you. Silence, the kind 000 is pointing at, says something entirely different. It says, I have decided this, and I still want you here. One closes the door. The other leaves it open and stops asking permission to stand in the room. Here is the practical distinction, and it is where most people get it wrong. The absence of justification does not mean the absence of communication. You can say what you feel. You can share what you want. You can tell someone you love them, that you will miss them, that this is difficult for you too. All of that is disclosure, and disclosure is intimacy. What you stop doing is building the case. The difference is between I am moving in April and I will miss you. And this, I am moving in April and I know the timing is bad and I have thought about staying and here are the reasons this is right. The first is a person telling the truth. The second is a person seeking a verdict. Withdrawal is cold because it removes the person from the exchange. Ending justification removes only the tribunal. And there is something you will feel almost immediately when you get this right. Conversations become shorter and warmer at the same time. Shorter because you are no longer filling them with defense. Warmer because what remains is actual content. What you feel, what you want, what you notice about them. You will also find that you listen differently. A person mid-justification cannot listen because they are monitoring the reaction and preparing the next paragraph. When the defense drops, attention becomes available. That is not distance. That is presence arriving for the first time. Now something is going to be required of you, and it will be smaller and harder than anything described so far. A single choice made with no permission attached. The first choice. You make without permission. It will not be dramatic. People expect the turning point to be a confrontation. a conversation where they finally hold the line. That is not usually where it happens. It happens with something almost invisible. You decline an invitation and write one sentence instead of four. You order what you actually want instead of the acceptable version. You leave a place early and say only that you are heading out. And then you sit with the feeling that follows. The feeling is not empowerment. Be prepared for that. The feeling is a low anxiety, a sense that something is unfinished, a pull toward sending a follow-up message that softens it. Do not send the message. Let the sentence stand incomplete. What you are doing in those minutes is more significant than it appears. You are giving your nervous system an experience it has never had, choosing, staying silent, and nothing catastrophic happening. That is how the pattern actually breaks, not through insight, through repetition of an unfamiliar outcome. And this is the part people most often get wrong. They wait for confidence before they act. They believe that once they truly feel entitled to their choices, the explaining will stop naturally. It runs the other direction. The confidence is downstream. You act first, tolerate the discomfort, survive it, and the entitlement builds afterward from the evidence. Waiting to feel ready is just another form of asking permission, with yourself as the authority. Start absurdly small. The size does not matter, because what is being retrained is not the decision, it is the tolerance for the silence after it. Do it 4 or 5 times and you will notice something shift. The anxiety after an unexplained choice drops from significant to mild, then to barely present. Then one day you make a large decision, you state it in a single sentence and you feel almost nothing. That is the amplification the zeros were holding space for. But something will move in your relationships as this settles, and you should know what to expect, because the changes are not always the ones people predict. What happens to your relationships? The first change is that you stop being invited to certain conversations. Not excluded exactly, simply not summoned. The conversations where your role was to defend or to smooth or to make someone's discomfort manageable stop happening. Nobody announces this. The invitations just stop arriving. That feels like rejection for about a month. Then it feels like room. The second change is that a few people will get closer, and it will surprise you. These are usually people who found the old version slightly exhausting, not because you were difficult, but because it was hard to know where you actually stood. Everything came layered in qualification, so they never quite knew what you wanted. When you become direct, they can finally locate you, and people move toward what they can locate. The third change is the one nobody warns you about. Some of your relationships will simply become quieter without becoming worse. This is where most people panic and undo everything. They mistake reduced volume for reduced closeness. The calls are shorter, so they assume something is wrong, and they go looking for the problem, and in looking for it, they create it. Less talking is not less love. Much of what filled your relationships was maintenance, and maintenance drops when there is nothing to maintain. The fourth change is internal. Your standard for who gets access rises without you deciding to raise it. You will notice you no longer pursue understanding from people who have consistently failed to offer it. Not out of resentment, out of accounting. You have a limited amount of explanatory energy, and you have watched where it disappears. This is what a closed cycle looks like from the outside. Fewer people, more presence. Shorter conversations, less residue. Relationships that require no upkeep because they are not built on a performance that must be sustained. And underneath all of it, one fear will remain. The one that kept the whole structure standing for as long as it did. The fear of being misunderstood. Forever. Here is what you have actually been afraid of. Not conflict, not disapproval. Something more specific and much harder to name. You have been afraid that if you stop explaining, the wrong version of you becomes permanent, that someone will carry an inaccurate picture of you for the rest of their life, and you will have allowed it. That fear is why you keep going back. One more message, one more attempt at clarity, not to win, but to make sure the record is accurate. Sit with the actual arithmetic of this. Some people are going to misunderstand you until they die. That is not a possibility to be managed. It is a certainty already in progress. There are people who currently hold a version of you that is wrong in ways you will never even discover. and you have no access to what lives in another person's mind. None. Your explanations do not install accurate copies of you in other people. They produce their own interpretations, filtered through everything those people already are. The record you have been protecting does not exist anywhere. This is where most people get it wrong in the final stretch. They try to stop caring. They tell themselves other opinions do not matter, which is a lie they cannot sustain, and it collapses the first time someone important gets them badly wrong. You do not need to stop caring. You need to stop believing it is fixable. Those are different. Caring and accepting can coexist. It can hurt that your father sees you as ungrateful, and also be true that no sentence you construct will change it. When you truly absorb that, something releases that feels almost physical. Because the exhaustion was never from being misunderstood. It came from believing the misunderstanding was your unfinished task, a permanent assignment you kept failing. Put it down, not the relationship, the assignment. And what remains when you put it down is the thing 4 zeros were pointing at from the very first time you noticed them. The place where you are already whole. Return to the shape one last time. 0 is a closed circle. No beginning visible, no end, nothing entering, nothing leaving. It is the only digit that is complete in its own form. That is not decoration. It is the entire message. You have been operating as though your legitimacy came from outside. As though a choice became valid at the moment someone accepted your reasoning. Approval was the final step, and until it arrived, the decision stayed provisional. The circle has no final step. It is closed at every point. What 000 has been marking, appearing at the top of hours and on clean totals, and in the seconds after your unnecessary apologies, is a completion that already happened. Not one you need to earn, one you have been declining to acknowledge. The version of you that needed permission ended some time ago. You have felt it in the way the explanations stopped satisfying you even when they worked. You have felt it in the exhaustion that came from conversations you technically won. You outgrew the structure and kept living inside it out of loyalty to who it protected. And here is the last thing most people miss, right at the end. They expect this to feel like liberation. Loud, obvious, a weight lifting. It rarely does. It feels like ordinariness. You make a decision and simply do not build the case for it. There is no rush of freedom. There is a small absence where the effort used to be, and then you continue with your day. That flatness is the arrival. Freedom does not feel like triumph. It feels like the disappearance of something you were carrying for so long you had stopped noticing its weight. The 4 zeros were never a promise about your future. They were a receipt. Proof that a cycle finished, that the space is open, and that what you place there next will be multiplied. Everything now comes back to one sentence, and it is the shortest thing here. You owe no one the reason. Say it plainly. You owe no one the reason. Not your family. Not the people who raised you, or the ones who left, or the ones still waiting for an account of your choices. Not the version of yourself that keeps asking whether this would hold up under questioning. The reason is yours. It was always yours. You may share it, freely, warmly, with people who have earned that closeness. Sharing a reason as a gift is one of the most intimate things a person can do. But submitting it for approval is something else entirely, and you have spent long enough doing that. So here is what changes, starting with the next conversation. You state the thing. You stop. You let the silence exist without filling it. When the discomfort rises, and it will, you stay in it and let it pass because it always passes faster than you expect. And when the zeros appear again, because they will, on a clock or a screen, or a total that lands clean, you will read them correctly now. They are not asking you to explain yourself better. They are telling you that the part of your life that required explanation is finished, and the space it left is yours to fill. You have been standing in that space for a while now, waiting for someone to confirm you belong there. Nobody is coming to confirm it. That is not abandonment. That is the whole point. Stay here. Say less. Choose what you actually want, and let it stand unexplained. The circle was already closed.